Story 1. Watching 75-year-old Martin Gugino being violently shoved by riot police and cracking his head on the pavement during the 2020 protests in Buffalo, New York. Then watching Donald Trump get on Twitter making up all sorts of lies to justify it. Story 2. It was my first time voting. I voted for him in 2016. I was slowly becoming less of a fan during his first term. By 2018 and into 2019, I was clearly not for him, but also not a hater. I started thinking of myself as an independent. Once COVID-19 hit and I saw how he pandered to his conspiracy theorist base yet got vaccinated, just like the entire Fox News crew who went on air and said the vaccine was dangerous and requiring it was un-American, yet they all received it. I completely changed my view. I accepted that he lied, pandered, and did whatever he could to gain votes. He flip-flopped on subjects based on which decision would make him more popular with his base. I grew up with very conservative parents and hated Barack Obama because of their views. But I was in college while Obama was finishing his last term and the primaries were going on. I started to realize that I did not actually hate Barack Obama and thought he was a pretty decent president. That was the beginning of my political shift. A full transformation did not happen until COVID-19, when I accepted that I disagreed with almost everything Donald Trump or modern-day Republicans stood for. Story 3. Answering for my dad, because he and I have had several long talks about this very topic. He's basically Donald Trump's ideal audience. He's a straight, white, middle-aged Christian male working a white-collar job. He grew up in a fairly typical family in Texas, and he's a firm believer in meritocracies because he's a rare example of a hard worker who got better jobs rather than just being exploited by the system. He was around my age when Ronald Reagan was president, and he has always tended to vote conservative mostly because of their fiscal policies. Around Donald Trump's first election, he had also been recently divorced, and he was definitely in the honeymoon phase with a hardcore Southern Baptist woman who shared a lot of his sensibilities. He also worried a lot about me, as I was becoming a teenager and learning about the world and myself, and he was scared of losing me as all parents are. He also had a problem with drinking, so he was in a very emotionally vulnerable state. Add to that the anti-social justice warrior culture that was starting to get its roots, and my dad unfortunately fell for the conservative lie that Black, Latino, and transgender people are coming to take jobs from hardworking Americans. He wasn't and still isn't a hateful person, and he taught me to respect everyone regardless of identity, but he still would deride things he didn't understand, like being transgender or non-binary. His girlfriend at the time didn't help either, and she was also casually ableist and very ignorant. So he voted for Donald Trump. Then he ended up losing money thanks to his fiscal policies. Then I started having random seizures that led to thousands of dollars in hospital bills. Then I went to college and realized I'm bisexual. He began to reevaluate some of his opinions and decisions. I'm queer, autistic, and a woman, and lots of Donald Trump's policies affect those three groups in particular, and he didn't want me getting hurt by government bureaucracy. COVID-19 really got him thinking. His girlfriend originally had him convinced that the whole thing was a plan by the deep state, and since he was quarantined with her, he never got a break from her nonsense. Even if that wasn't enough, the fact still stands. He ended up losing his livelihood and a lot of money due to Donald Trump's policies. Again, this is the picture-perfect Donald Trump voter who should have only gained from his actions. He voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 election, and January 6th was the nail in the coffin. Unfortunately, he stayed with his Donald Trump-loving girlfriend for a few more years, during which time she unsuccessfully tried to convince him that the election was stolen and that January 6th was caused by deep state Antifa agents. She also bought him an ugly Donald Trump teddy bear, featuring the hideous comb-over and a red tie. Thankfully, he finally left her after she said some truly nasty things to me, and he stopped drinking as well. In 2024, he almost completely reversed his previous opinions. He told me that he was going to check every candidate on the ballot, and if they said anything good about Donald Trump or anything about how the woke mind virus is destroying us, he wasn't going to vote for them. He opposes all the decisions the current administration is making, and he's even cut off friends of his who have turned to the Make America Great Again movement. He still doesn't fully understand a lot of things like transgender people, but he's making efforts to understand and ask questions. He's made it very clear that if I need to get away from this country for a political reason, He'll fully support me however he can. I'm so proud of my dad. He's shown me that it's okay to be wrong as long as we grow from our mistakes. He's more of a patriot than the Make America Great Again folks will ever be. Story 4. If I may answer for my father, who is not online whatsoever, I think his evolution on Donald Trump is really interesting. He is a simple man. He is only really passionate about 3 things in order: his family, his business, and motorcycles. He does not like taxes, government interference in his affairs, or politicians of all kinds. Those things alone made him a default Republican, even though he rarely voted. What got him into supporting Donald Trump was the first primary debate in which Trump brutally attacked Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, and the others, basically accusing them of lining their pockets with lobbyist donations and tax loopholes. Even though I repeatedly tried to convince him that Trump himself is a known cheater, tax fraudster, and con artist, he was impressed to see someone from outside politics trash career politicians. It was the one thing my dad continued to bring up when later defending his vote. My family is not wealthy by any means, but as a business owner, Trump's tax cuts did benefit him. Because my dad is not online and does not watch news sources that report negatively on Trump, to him the first term was a success. Even on January 6th, he was appalled by the event but mostly blamed the crowd, not Trump. He voted for Trump again last year. But finally, Trump affected one of my dad's 3 important pillars: his business. The tariffs created a lot of problems. The business sells products manufactured in China and Canada. The inconsistent and ever-changing nature of the tariffs, the shifting justifications for them, and the unpredictability made it impossible to plan long-term. That was enough to get my dad to go online for once and find some accurate reporting on Trump. It has been like an awakening for him. I do not think he regrets his vote, but he wishes Trump would stop being such a failure and just focus on lowering taxes and shrinking the government. Seeing this taught me something about casual Trump voters. If they never cared about the racism, human rights abuses, fascist dictatorial tendencies, lying, narcissism, vulgarity, rampant corruption, anti-democratic actions, stupidity, sexual assault allegations, or any of the many other reasons to oppose Trump, it is probably because they are not paying attention to things that do not directly affect their lives. You can bring all of that up and they will just dismiss it. But as soon as he does something harmful that affects them, they can be turned. Story 5. When he said, "I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters." I laughed when I first heard it. Then I realized he was not joking. That was the moment I stopped laughing. Story 6. I joined the military. I grew up very conservative and carried that into adulthood. Then, being away from my hometown and among a diverse crowd, working with people from other countries, I realized that I was wrong. Empathy and compassion win over bigotry and hate. Story 7. I'll answer honestly. Until the 2020 election, I only paid attention to voting records, policy statements, and platforms. What do I care what personality someone has, as long as they vote in a way that aligns with my beliefs? It's the policies that matter, it's the bills that matter, not whether a politician is a little off-putting personally. I'm embarrassed now, but I was a Republican for far too long. I believed what the platform spoke of. I believed the policy guidelines. I didn't pay attention to personalities or even specifics. I was more of a centrally leaning conservative anyway, not a hardliner, not a fascist. More of a yes, changes are needed, but let's do it carefully. Let's pace ourselves. Let's try not to change everything all at once. Let's take deliberate, well-planned steps. Let's not rush things and do things we regret. To be honest, all during Donald Trump's first term, my life wasn't that bad. Whatever the federal government did during that period didn't affect me much. So what was I to be upset about? Stay the course, I thought, because things are relatively okay for me now. But then I caught a random video that compiled many of the horrible things Trump has said and done. This was around January 2020. I was horrified. Before this, I never gave him any attention. Then came the ultraviolet light suggestion for COVID-19, the "it'll only be 2 more weeks" promise, and all the deception in how he handled the pandemic. I pulled my wife aside, showed her the video and asked, "Has he always been like this? Is this new?" After her volley of punches at me, and after her voice gave out screaming, Haven't you been paying attention? I finally decided I needed to do more research. I researched Trump and all that he's done and said, policy aside, I was disgusted. I could not believe I'd been blind to it all this time. I also researched what Republicans have been trying to get done. The dealings, lies, sneakiness, collusion, patronizing behavior, racism, indifference to the poor, and catering to the rich. I was horrified and embarrassed. So I voted for Joe Biden in 2020. I couldn't abide by this kind of leadership, this kind of morally corrupt person at the helm. By 2024, I realized my life wasn't worse under a Democrat president either. What was I so afraid of? I noticed that most liberals weren't extreme anyway. They didn't want sweeping changes that would make the United States look nothing like before. They wanted the same changes I wanted, maybe at a faster pace, maybe at a higher budgetary cost. But there was nothing I outright disagreed with. While I deeply regret voting for Trump in 2016, I don't regret voting for Biden at all in 2020. Now that I'm actually looking, I see that Republicans, not necessarily conservatives, are entirely unmoored from the beliefs and values that I held. They're only in it for themselves. They don't truly care about anyone but whoever can get them ahead. This is true in their character, their actions, and their policies. There you go. I'm that guy. I bared my soul here. Story 8. Meeting a transgender woman in real life. I was deeply involved in the alt-right from discovering 4chan at age 8 until I was 24. Narcissism became my coping mechanism, like all the other hurt children in adult bodies I associated with. We thought we were better than everyone who wasn't like us, and anyone who disagreed or didn't conform was devalued and attacked. My guild in World of Warcraft would post pictures from the transgender passing community to mock together as part of our nightly bonding. The left were stereotyped as hysterical, blue-haired, having daddy issues, friendless, and so on. It was all projection from us. We couldn't make friends any other way, so we bonded through hate. In 2018, after voting for Donald Trump and descending into alcoholism, I met someone in a Counter-Strike global offensive game with whom I immediately connected. Later, they revealed they were a transgender woman, which surprised me. More importantly, I was shocked at how badly my friends treated me for continuing to talk to her. Eventually, I defended her and pushed back against my friends. Over the years, I cut contact with all of them, flew across the world to date her for a few months, and returned to find myself in shambles. I am now sober through years of therapy and walking a beautiful path of self-discovery and the possibility of genuine human connection again. All thanks to someone I was told to hate. Now, I view the far right and the Make America Great Again movement as I view my past self. Hurt people desperate for connection who do the wrong things to get it. Story 9. Not me, but my mom. I showed her videos of him before the 2016 election. I told her all the things he was planning to do. At that point, she was a lifelong Republican, and the idea of voting for a Democrat, especially Hillary Clinton, was a non-starter. For her, she already didn't like Bill, but she had a special animosity toward Hillary for some reason. I think it was also internalized misogyny. She had told me several times when I was younger that a woman couldn't be president because they were too emotional. When I asked her about all the things Donald Trump said he planned to do and cut, she told me that we had laws and safeguards in place to stop anyone from unilaterally doing any of that. She also thought having someone who wasn't a politician would shake the political tree and maybe light a fire under some of the career politicians. I don't know the exact moment or event that was her tipping point. I just remember going to her house one day, and she said, "You know I don't like admitting when I'm wrong, but Donald Trump has done everything you said he would. I really thought we had laws and guardrails, but it seems it was all just tradition and people following rules that weren't written down." She was at a total loss about how her mother and one of her sisters were still enamored with him. So in 2020, for the first time in her life, she voted for a Democratic candidate, and I could tell it hurt her pride a lot. Liberal was a dirty word in our home when I was growing up, but she swallowed it down and did what she knew was right. She even voted for Kamala Harris in 2024, which was an even larger step outside her previously held beliefs. I'm sure if the Republican Party ever returns to running uninteresting white men who are not unstable, she will likely flip back. But I am very proud of her for fighting off a lifetime of programming to do what she knew was right. Story 10. Back at the start of college, I liked the idea of drain the swamp, and getting a businessman and non-politician into government. Unfortunately, you cannot run the country like a business. It is not meant to make a profit, and it is not supposed to be transactional. We do this, you do that. I had already stopped following him by the time COVID-19 came around, but his handling of the pandemic, attacking people and treating it almost like a joke, made no sense to me. At a time when someone was needed to bring people together and comfort a scared public, he did nothing but point fingers, yell, and blame. When it came to Project 2025, I could not imagine supporting him. I am still registered as a Republican, but he holds no values that the true Republican Party holds and has warped it into the Make America Great Again party. Story 11. Originally from Alabama, I was taught to just vote Republican. So in 2016, I did that without paying much attention to politics, especially in a predominantly Republican state. I didn't focus on politics until late 2019 and early 2020. When COVID-19 hit, I started watching the news more closely and listening to the absurd things he was saying. When he mentioned putting disinfectant in our bodies during a press conference, and the woman he looked over seemed concerned, confused, and bewildered, I knew he was not the right leader for our country or for me. As the months and years passed, my opinion of him worsened. Most acquaintances I still talk to ask if I would rather have Joe Biden instead. My response is, if someone is sleeping, they are not currently causing problems. I apologize for not paying closer attention in 2016. I would not have voted for him if I had known. I can't even vote Republican anymore because they are not true Republicans. They have become supporters of former President Donald Trump. Story 12. I stopped being constantly online and consuming right-wing content where they blame all problems in the world on somebody else because they belong to a particular group. Ironically, I took personal responsibility and improved myself instead of complaining about women, transgender people, or immigrants. Story 13. Oh boy, I'd say my girlfriend had a big part in it, but specifically Tim Pool. Like many Republicans I know, I got my political information from ragebait YouTubers and Facebook memes. I get riled up and say stupid things, and she would listen, then start to ask questions. We'd look up the issue and discuss it, and more often than not, I'd admit I was wrong and accept it. I think that helped a lot. I can admit I'm wrong and change my mind if presented with decent facts. My biggest problem is, I don't normally seek out facts involving certain things. That being said, the single event that made me go, wait, that doesn't sound right at all, was the New York Attorney General fraud case against Trump. It wasn't just a vague impression because that's all I was hearing and seeing on these shows and memes, and I was fully supporting the he's being politically persecuted narrative pushed by traitors. I was listening to Tim Pool criticize the woke liberal left and this Attorney General case, and he was, like many others, explaining to his audience how the case was not about fraud. Then he mentioned on air the Zillow value of Mar-a-Lago to prove a point. I'm a numbers guy. I work in engineering, commercial, and residential construction. $1 billion versus $26 million is a huge difference. The value stated was so absurd, I stopped what I was doing to look it up. Then I compared it to surrounding properties. Then I read through the indictment. Then I researched the history of the place, Trump, and how exactly they tax access properties in Palm Beach, I believe. The numbers don't lie. After a short time of digging, I understood why the property was actually valued so low and why he was charged with fraud. This, of course, led me to ask, what else am I being misled about? I then dove deeply into all his trials, what actually happened on January 6th, the fake elector scheme, his history, and more. Yes, I feel foolish for supporting him. In fact, Kamala Harris was the first political campaign I ever donated to. I've also tried to talk to some family, friends, and coworkers, but they are so influenced by Fox News they couldn't hear me if they wanted to. I'm seen as an un-American traitor now. It's disappointing. This is a truncated version of events. Story 14. In 2020, at a terrifying time when what we truly needed was empathy and unity, I saw the man I had proudly voted for in 2016, while also being exposed to daily Fox and Patriot content at work for years, do the opposite of everything my morals stood for. Every day, I watched him complain about everyone who disagreed with him. Then the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd protests started. The demonization of anyone standing up for civil rights and change was too much. The final straw was when he had his supporters tear gas peaceful American protesters so he could pose for a photo shoot. The idolization of the former president, shared by his followers, made it clear that it was not the movement for me. Story 15. The barbaric actions of immigration and customs enforcement agents rounding up and deporting people of color are troubling. A large portion of the workforce are immigrants who are honest, hardworking people. Some of them are United States citizens, but they do not ask for proof of citizenship. It is just detain first, ask questions later. When he said he was going after criminals, I was hoping for violent gang members like Train de Agua. He also mentioned tighter border policies, and I was hoping it would reduce the flow of fentanyl into this country. I wanted a safer border and country, not the deportation of immigrants who have not done anything wrong. Story 16. COVID-19. I was a staunch evangelical conservative until 2020. I had started loosening on conservatism a bit in the preceding couple of years. I saw that the people I once thought were the light of the world became the most selfish people on the planet. Not that they were not already, but the pandemic made me see it in a different way than before. Now, I am an activist leftist atheist and despise everything about Donald Trump, Republicans, evangelicalism, and similar groups. Story 17. I wanted to see him because I definitely did not want Hillary Clinton and wanted an outsider to come in and drain the swamp. It became pretty clear not long into his first term that he was not going to drain the swamp. He also had conflicts with some people I respect highly, including generals James Mattis and John Kelly, and was extremely disrespectful towards them, which I found problematic. While it was chaotic, it was entertaining, but I realized quickly that he was not a good leader. The events of January 6th were surreal to me and really opened my eyes to what a dishonest person he was. Story 18. I voted for him the first term, but I stopped supporting him during his original run when I realized how embarrassing it was to have a president on Twitter hurling insults and unable to refrain from having the last word. What absolutely solidified my decision was him autographing Bibles, selling them, and saying he did not have anything he needed to repent for because he tries to be a good person. He was unable to quote a single verse from the Bible he was selling when asked, "Which do you like best, the Old Testament or the New Testament?" He replied, "I like them both." I roll. Story 19. Reading these, I see many similarities between leaving Make America Great Again and deconstructing from religion. Thank you for putting yourselves out there and showing growth. I appreciate all of you very much. It is not an easy thing to do. Story 20. A few months ago, I began to dislike him because of his treatment of Volodymyr Zelensky. The Epstein files were the final straw. I want him impeached now. Story 21. As a child, I thought he was cool for appearing in movies. However, as a young adult, learning that he was essentially walking into pageant dressing rooms and staring made him seem like a creep. Story 22. Raised Mormon, so Republican by default, and never really had a chance to have the cognitive dissonance glasses removed because they were placed there from the beginning. It is easy to think like a cult when that is all you know. There has been a lot of deconstruction to get where I am now. I am ashamed for how long it took to get here, but I am here now. I go to protests, confront bigoted family members, and am vocal about this hateful person that was elected to office when we should have shut it down. The information you receive on the other side of it all is heavily censored and hard to find the truth in. If you don't know to look for it, you don't look. Sometimes removing the glasses takes more aggressive means, including real-life consequences. Unfortunately, I worry that we will run out of time before the majority we need to wake up do so. Truthfully, we are already too late when you see all the damage done. The terror in Gaza, so much damage in our home country and our allies abroad, or those whose suffering we are facilitating. I know there will be a lot of anger towards me and those who once voted or thought differently. But I hope you know we have joined in the anger and will use it to make changes now in any way we can. It is all we can do now. Story 23. I am a registered independent who has never voted for the Republican Party. I was curious about Donald Trump when he first announced his candidacy before the 2016 election. My thought at the time was that he was too wealthy to be bought off and could thus be a potential solution to the political establishment. Shortly after, he said that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by China, and I instantly lost all interest in him. Story 24. I was suppressing my homosexuality my entire life until I was about 21, which was in 2018. I liked Donald Trump and was loud about it, partly to hide any suspicion from others and maybe even myself. Interestingly, my family was not Republican. I was the only outspoken person in the family, and they just tolerated me. After several years of loneliness, I bravely explored the community I was naturally meant to belong to and found out I wasn't a monster after all. I am now married to a man and have firmly rejected the divisive and harmful rhetoric that the Republican Party promotes. Give your outspoken Republican teenager some time. They are dealing with what I was dealing with. Story 25. As an independent, I lean more conservative, so usually voted Republican, but not always, stumped and voted for Obama. I was really on the fence in 2020, but I was so upset with Clinton and her handling of Benghazi that I just couldn't bring myself to vote for her. Most of my family was voting for Trump, so I went along. I deeply regretted that choice. Almost everything he did regarding environmental policy and pulling out of the Paris Accord angered me. I have been around long enough to remember rivers being on fire and coughing my way to work driving through smog that was as opaque as any heavy fog. However, how he and the entire Republican Congress handled COVID-19, denying science, recommending ineffective cures, sending test kits to Russia, repudiating vaccines, showed zero compassion. It was bad enough that he was doing it, but for the entire party to echo his actions was worse. I still consider myself an independent, but I will never vote Republican again. Story 26. I thought he was different from the others, down to earth and listening to what the people of America wanted. But I was wrong about the narcissistic, racist, pedophile cheeseball. Story 27. I was never a part of the Make America Great Again movement per se. I have always been a registered independent. I did vote for Donald Trump in 2016. However, the 2020 pandemic really did it for me. The fact that he was anti-mask and anti-vaccine, and that he went against the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention when millions were dying, enraged me. Instead of using the pandemic as a force to unify the country, he used it as an opportunity to divide it further. I knew then that he was not fit to handle a crisis, and he was not fit to be commander-in-chief. Also, he made a mockery of the office of the President of the United States. This was the first time in my life that I felt embarrassed by the country that I came from. I felt embarrassed to be an American. In the past 2 elections, I have voted for the Democratic Party no matter who, and I am absolutely disgusted and disappointed that Donald Trump is back in office. Story 28. I grew up and realized I was allowed to disagree with my parents' values. I was freshly 18 in the fall of 2016 and went with my family to the polls to vote for Donald Trump. I was on a break from my first semester of college at the time. College was my first real exposure to any outside ideas or ways of life and thought, and I was primed by religious dogma to instantly discard them. I was raised and homeschooled by abusive far-right religious extremists. At the time of voting for Donald Trump, I was conflicted about my religious faith, but still quite indoctrinated with the ideas that politically I should vote to support conservative values such as anti-abortion laws and homophobia. It took some time to get to know myself and figure out who I was. About a year of being in college, meeting people of various backgrounds, cultures, and faiths, taking science and philosophy courses, and learning that I had buried my real self in childhood long ago. Of course, I regret that I voted for Donald Trump. Ironically, I am queer and child-free by choice, so the reasons I had to justify voting for him conflict with my current values. I have very progressive politics. I barely see that version of me as myself, and I have a lot of compassion for what she was carrying internally at that time. Story 29. I think the Grand Old Party lost their way when Southern racists were courted to join the Grand Old Party. I'm from Mississippi. I was with my father the first time he voted in the 1970s. He was fearful of retaliation. Then racism embraced religion, and we got the moral majority and Ronald Reagan. Full steam ahead to people praising Donald Trump and some professing that he is the second coming. Poor white people voting against their best interests, hoping that black and brown people suffer. The Grand Old Party claims to want smaller government while always increasing the deficit. Poor white people rejoice when people lose their federal jobs, but have no problem with tax dollars making Elon Musk the richest man in the world. professing to be Christian, but not doing anything that Jesus did while on earth. Denying food to the poor, denying assistance to strangers, neglecting the sick, and failing to provide for the homeless. People have no problem with concentration camps, deporting people to developing countries, denying pregnant women access to medical treatment, or closing access to educational programs such as Job Corps. The grand old party grows meaner each day, asking the lower middle class, the working class, and the poor to fund the government while billionaires can basically live tax-free and receive government services that the non-wealthy pay for. I'm not sure if supporters of the grand old party will ever wake up. Story 31. Deporting immigrants who were not murderers or rapists, but rather are farm workers, construction workers, and families of my students. 2. Jeffrey Epstein. 3. Insulting us for questioning him. 4. Crippling certified nursing assistants in nursing homes. Story 31. I am a lifelong Republican since the 1980s, and that is not going to change. I did vote for Donald Trump in 2020, but what did change? After the 2020 election, when they repeatedly told everyone that evidence of a rigged election was coming out and that they were working on it and gathering all of it, after 30 days we still had nothing and no answers. That was the first major mistake they made. The second major mistake was January 6th and Donald Trump's refusal to admit he or they made a mistake. As a man who served in the United States Army and pledged to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, Trump lost any chance at my support after that. To be honest, the final strike against all who are Team Trump came when Rudy Giuliani admitted under oath that his claims of voter fraud were lies and they knew it. I do not care if it was in one specific situation with only those election workers in Georgia. Knowingly lying to the public in public is where I draw the line, and they can never come back from that. Everything that happened with Donald Trump since 2020 has been an accumulation of evidence that he is a complete scoundrel who will do or say absolutely anything. Believing in America, I seriously believe January 6th was the end for Donald Trump. Unfortunately, I was disappointed by my fellow Americans. I voted for Kamala Harris in 2024, and I might have given up on many fellow Americans, but I am not giving up on my country. I have not yet given up on the Republican Party. I will wait to see if they fail to redeem themselves after Team Trump inevitably implodes. I am not holding my breath, but I am optimistic. Story 32. Did not care about politics in 2016 because I was young and just of voting age. I thought both candidates were bad and did not vote. The moment the COVID-19 jokes and his complete mishandling of the situation by trusting educated and competent people to manage the situation in 2019 and 2020 occurred, I realized he was literally a racist who would rather deflect blame and do nothing instead of finding solutions. How did we get here? Story 33. My parents raised us Catholic and very Republican. I went to the March for Life 4 years in college. I was part of the College Republicans and went to the Conservative Political Action Conference all 4 years. Thankfully, I went to a Jesuit college and I definitely began to learn empathy and about the minority experience in college. But I was still pretty Republican in 2016 and voted for Donald Trump. He seemed different from other Republicans. The first thing that really bothered me was when he mocked a disabled reporter. That was absolutely disgraceful. I had trouble reconciling that kind of attitude with my religious values. I attribute that to my first thoughts like, maybe the Republican candidate isn't always the best person. As I watched his presidency progress, I found myself disliking him more and more. I spend a lot of time on Reddit, so I think the left-leaning crowd there led me to become more liberal. After seeing many Bernie Sanders clips, I voted for the Democratic candidate for the first time in my life in 2020 at age 30. I consider myself a democratic socialist now. Many of my friends from high school and college are very surprised since I was so conservative back then. Story 34. I don't support Donald Trump and never voted for him. However, some of my friends did. Not hardcore Make America Great Again supporters, just everyday people who don't follow the news closely and thought they were choosing the lesser of two evils. Now they regret it. For them, the breaking point wasn't immigration policy, Medicaid cuts, or even higher tariffs. It was the Epstein files. They had always assumed this administration would be corrupt, but that they would somehow be included in the elite group and share the benefits. Epstein's revelations made it clear they were excluded. and that sense of betrayal has infuriated them. For clarification, in the club does not mean they want to be part of the pedophile group, but that they expect it to be included in the elite class with access to that information, the group who is in that club. Government secrets, transparency, and full disclosure. They honestly thought an outsider like Trump would get them access to that information. Story 35. I voted for him in the first round. It seemed like a change was needed. The whole time was never again. January 6th happened, and that solidified it. Do not repeat mistakes twice. I did not vote for that candidate in this round. It has not been a year yet. Some of the sales are gone, and there are more leaks than I can count. But I stand by my ship. It still floats. Story 36. I would like to say that while I wanted Donald Trump to win in 2016, I was not a politically active person. I did not follow much of what was going on before him or even a couple of years after he was elected for the first term. It was COVID-19 that really woke me up. I watched our president tell people to inject bleach and stand under ultraviolet light to kill a worldwide virus. That is when I saw him for the clown he really is. Story 37. The clear and undeniable fact is that Donald J. Trump is in the Epstein files. It was not just some business meeting. He went to the island knowing what was happening there. His recent efforts to consolidate power, the human rights abuses, and the move toward authoritarian rule are concerning. His treatment of criminals, he himself has been accused, is troubling. The way he and his administration handle immigrants is harmful, affecting both legal and illegal immigrants. They lose their rights to defend themselves in a fair court of law, which is diabolical. He has a long history of making false promises and hypocrisy. In the past, he said the President of the United States would start a war with Iran because he was not a good negotiator. He is now doing exactly that. His unyielding support for the atrocities committed by the practically dictatorial Netanyahu is alarming. He sold the idea that he was capable of stopping the war in Ukraine, but ultimately, he talked down and belittled Zelensky. The list could go on. To be honest, it is embarrassing to say I used to support Trump. Story 38. I just matured, honestly. I had a child and started thinking more about the world I wanted for him. I watched my wife go through a pregnancy, which gave me deeper insight into women's healthcare and its importance. I realized many previously held beliefs did not align with reality. The only thing I am conservative about now is strong Second Amendment rights. Everything else is liberal. Story 39. I never supported Donald Trump, but I was a diehard Republican for 35 years. I recognized that Donald Trump was a criminal charlatan who did not reflect any of the values that mattered to me or any values at all. I was horrified to see my party embrace him. I have voted 100% Democrat ever since. Voting for Hillary Clinton nearly killed me. I am glad I can say I have never voted for Donald Trump or the cowardly and treasonous party that allowed him to rise to power. Story 40. I was largely Republican up to 2016. I did not vote for him but made fun of all the people who freaked out about him. My stance was, we will wait and see if he is what America needs. Then I saw what he did. I saw he was absolutely not what America needed. He was an absolute disaster. Then I saw Republicans justifying some of the most horrific things I have ever seen. Now I am embarrassed to have ever called myself a Republican. As far as I am concerned, if you still call yourself a Republican, you are admitting to being morally bankrupt without the ability to think for yourself. Story 41. I am maybe not your ultimate target demographic since I fell off really early, but here goes. Prior to 2016, I voted Republican basically in every election. 2008 was the first election I was able to vote in, and I voted for John McCain. Then, I voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. I volunteered on a state-level Republican campaign for the 2010 election. I was very conservative and not willing to see the other side. During the primaries in 2015, I was wary of Donald Trump. Not so much his personality, but I felt that he was not actually conservative. However, I supported him because that was what my party did. I was fully prepared to vote for him in 2016, all the way up until the Access Hollywood tape. In that moment, it was like all the lights came on. My wariness was correct. He was not actually conservative. He was just a narcissist willing to say anything to galvanize his base for nothing more than his own enrichment. I voted third party in 2016, then lived some life as an adult. I started actually figuring out my own beliefs instead of relying on what my parents taught me. I realized conservatism results in very cruel endings for far too many people. I ended up becoming the bleeding heart liberal my parents always railed against. In summary, Access Hollywood tape. Story 42. I went to one of his rallies. I was a moderate Republican for decades and attended one of his rallies in Vandalia, Ohio, where I heard him speak unedited for the first time. He was kind of funny but clearly mentally unwell, speaking in rambling incoherence. I had been watching Fox News, so I initially thought the left was complaining about nothing, but then I realized he was actually crazy. The parking lot was worse. I'm used to seeing a few people at rallies with conservative views I don't agree with, a polite way of saying there are typically a handful of white supremacists at any Republican event. That was fine in the sense that I don't tell people how to live their lives even if I disagree. At the Trump rally, there were way more than a few. It was borderline a lot. I was handed 3 different pieces of material with obvious Nazi imagery because they thought I'd appreciate it. That ended my support for Trump. It got me out of the bubble, and I started seeing the constant level of nonsense the right tolerates. The January 6th attack ended my support for all Republicans forever, as I consider the party fundamentally flawed. During COVID-19, my church supported some right-wing ideas, and about 20 people died, mostly elderly. The church started blaming the Democrats for it. In Ohio in 2020, after January 6th, I left the Republican Party and haven't looked back. I'm disgusted with both my senators and my representative. They are all corrupt, and I have no respect for any of them. It doesn't help that the Ohio Republican Party is probably the most corrupt state party in the United States, with everything tightly controlled and not openly broadcast. Note, I am one of those who feel the Republican Party left me. I still support Republican ideals that are no longer represented by the party. The Democrats aren't representing them either, so I'm not voting for the Democrats, but I'm certainly not voting for the fake conservatives. Story 43. It took 2 weeks of his tweeting in his first run to make me realize he was crazy. I left immediately. Story 44. Criticizing John McCain and calling veterans dishonorable is unacceptable. I cannot understand how any self-respecting veteran can support that person. Story 45. I was 15 the first time he was elected from a dysfunctional conservative family in rural Mississippi. I parroted my family's hatred because their affirmation fed my pride, reinforced by my descent into a Christian nationalist edgelord propaganda hole. Became disillusioned when I watched him fail to manage the pandemic, so I threw a protest vote for the Libertarian Party in 2020. I was distraught watching the America I knew die during the January 6th riot. I watched live on Fox News with my mother, and I immediately saw through the propaganda as she denounced the rioters as Antifa. Once the dust settled and I could breathe, I withdrew from politics for about a year. I moved from my community college to my university in 2021 and found John Oliver, which drastically accelerated my deprogramming. I have spent the past few years analyzing and critiquing my belief system to construct something defensible. Today, I have settled into a far healthier, non-fundamentalist version of Christianity and am a self-described democratic socialist. Story 46. I'm not American, so I didn't follow him much, but I thought the idea of a non-politician who was a businessman would be a good change. Someone who could focus on business and create a new era of innovation and building. Once I heard him get on the podium and speak, I knew I was wrong. Story 47. I voted for him the first time, caught up in the lesser of two evils, maybe he'll really change the system nonsense. I didn't really care about the wall or any of that. I quickly changed my perspective when he started failing at everything, and by the end of his term, he had done nothing but make a laughingstock of our country. Many people saw that failure of a first term and thought he was the right choice. It is baffling. That does not even address the fact that he is a twice impeached convicted felon. Story 48. People will not love hearing this, but I am strongly pro-life. However, I have realized that to be consistently pro-life, I need to support good sexual education, universal healthcare, help for the homeless and immigrants, non-discriminatory policing, prison reform, and many other issues that progressives support. So I consider myself a progressive, with abortion as a major exception. I am in an uncomfortable position where I cannot vote for pro-life candidates because they do not apply their own logic to the disenfranchised. Yet, I sincerely believe it is reasonable to say that life begins at conception and that ending it in most cases is murder. I vote Democrat because I see no other viable option. Story 49. Voted Republican my entire life until Joe Biden. Campaigned for John McCain and Mitt Romney. By 2016, I was starting to change my views a bit, but could not vote for Hillary Clinton. By the end of Donald Trump's first year, he was starting to wear thin. The constant falsehoods, lies, misinformation, and news headlines were incredibly annoying. By his second year, I was mostly against him due to his unprofessional commentary and decision-making. His handling of the pandemic sealed the deal for me. He divided the country and cost the lives of many people with his rhetoric and inaction. The next election cycle, I became more educated about the party members and the policies they supported. It really opened my eyes to how terrible most of the Republican politicians truly are. Story 50. Thank you to everyone who responded seriously. I hope more people can overcome their struggles like the brave individuals in this discussion. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.